Imagine a single high-stakes conversation, one that could define the destiny of thousands, perhaps even determine the trajectory of the entire Middle East for generations to come. This week, all eyes are on Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and United States President Donald Trump, as they take center stage in renewed efforts to negotiate a ceasefire and a hostage release deal that could bring an end to months of relentless conflict in the Gaza Strip. But as camera flashes illuminate tense faces and diplomats shuttle urgently between capitals, a single haunting question persists. Is genuine peace finally within reach? Or are we merely witnessing another round of political theater, destined to fade into disappointment? Let's step back. The confrontation between Israel and Gaza is not just another news headline. It is among the most deeply rooted, complex, and intractable conflicts in modern history. For over 7 decades, stretching back to the mid-20th century, the region has been a crucible for territorial disputes and clashing national dreams. The Gaza Strip, a narrow coastal enclave roughly the size of the American city of Detroit, has been governed by Hamas since the year 2007. That year marked a seismic shift, as the Palestinian political landscape fractured and Hamas ousted rival factions in a brief but violent civil war. Since then, a suffocating Israeli-Egyptian blockade, repeated wars, and failed peace efforts have become the grim norm. International actors have long attempted to mediate. The United States, wielding both diplomatic muscle and financial leverage, has often positioned itself as chief broker. Sometimes these efforts yield flickers of hope, like the Abraham Accords, which normalized relations between Israel and several Arab states in the early 2020s. Yet for Gaza's nearly 2 million residents, little changed. The blockade persisted, economic opportunities withered, and humanitarian crises deepened. As of early July 2025, more than 57,000 Palestinians are reported killed by Gaza's health ministry. The population, once vibrant and hopeful, is now largely displaced, living in makeshift camps among the ruins of their former homes. Hunger is rampant. A looming famine has been flagged by multiple United Nations agencies. The destruction is so total that entire neighborhoods have vanished, and basic civilian infrastructure such as hospitals and schools lies in rubble. How did we get here? The latest round of bloodshed was triggered on the 7th of October, 2023, when Hamas launched a devastating surprise attack on southern Israel. The assault killed approximately 1,200 Israelis, including entire families, and resulted in the abduction of 251 hostages, a number that would become a grim bargaining chip in subsequent negotiations. Israel's military response was swift and overwhelming, with airstrikes and ground operations that have continued for months. Now, after a cycle of violence that has shocked the world, negotiation teams are once again convening, this time in Qatar, with the added weight of American pressure and the world's anxious gaze. Yet, the negotiating table is surrounded by invisible landmines. Prime Minister Netanyahu finds himself squeezed from all directions. Within Israel, public pressure is reaching a boiling point. In the heart of Tel Aviv, thousands gather weekly in public squares near the defense ministry, waving blue and white flags and chanting for an end to the war and the safe return of the roughly 50 hostages believed to remain alive in Gaza. The pain of families whose loved ones are still captive is palpable. Their photos are held aloft in silent vigils and noisy protests alike. The Israeli public, once united in grief and anger, is now fracturing along political lines. Some hardline members of Netanyahu's right-wing coalition are adamant. No deal that leaves Hamas in power is acceptable. They view any compromise as a threat to Israel's security and sovereignty. Meanwhile, other figures, such as Foreign Minister Gideon Saar, have gone on record supporting a permanent ceasefire, arguing that endless war is unsustainable and morally indefensible. The result is a political maelstrom, with Netanyahu's leadership under intense scrutiny and his coalition's stability hanging by a thread. On the ground in Gaza, the situation is even more desperate. The United Nations and major international NGOs have issued dire warnings of famine, describing scenes of children scavenging for food and hospitals overwhelmed with casualties. Most of the original hostages have been released through painstaking negotiations. Some exchanged for Palestinian prisoners, others freed as part of temporary truces. Yet, according to Israeli sources, roughly 20 hostages are still believed to be alive, each day spent in captivity amplifying the anguish of their families. For the population of Gaza, every day is a struggle for survival. Access to clean water is scarce, medical supplies are running out, and the specter of disease threatens to compound the suffering. Hamas, for its part, is digging in. The group now insists on ironclad guarantees, a permanent halt to hostilities, the complete withdrawal of Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip, and a return to United Nations-managed aid distribution, measures they see as essential for the protection and dignity of the Palestinian people. A senior Hamas official recently declared that any proposal falling short of a lasting cessation of hostilities is inadequate and unacceptable. This demand reflects a deep mistrust, rooted in decades of broken truces and unmet promises. Akiva Eldar, a veteran Israeli analyst and frequent commentator on regional affairs, offers a sobering assessment. Netanyahu might be positioning Hamas to reject the ceasefire plan rather than genuinely seeking a breakthrough. His words echo a common suspicion that political leaders, burdened by domestic pressures, sometimes prefer to maintain the status quo rather than risk the political fallout of compromise. On the other side, voices from Hamas and allied groups argue that Israel's demands for disarmament and security buffers are designed to perpetuate occupation, not end it. According to Adnan Hayajneh, a respected Middle East political scientist, Israel, under Netanyahu, is not interested in a ceasefire. The aim is to remove Palestinians from Gaza, not to negotiate peace. Amid this deadlock, the United States has tried to play the role of honest broker. President Trump, returning to office less than 6 months ago, has made Middle East peace a centerpiece of his foreign policy. Recently, he expressed optimism, telling reporters there is a good chance for a deal this week. Trump's approach, marked by both public declarations and behind-the-scenes pressure, has raised hopes and skepticism in equal measure. The American administration insists that guarantees of a permanent ceasefire are non-negotiable, but so far, concrete promises have been elusive. An official close to the mediators in Doha, the capital of Qatar, emphasized that without credible American assurances, any deal risks unraveling at the first sign of tension. The first session of the latest indirect talks in Qatar ended, predictably, without a breakthrough. The obstacles are formidable. Netanyahu has publicly pledged not to accept any of the changes to the ceasefire proposal demanded by Hamas. Chief among Israel's concerns is the insistence on dismantling Hamas's military infrastructure, a red line for Israeli security officials, but a non-starter for Hamas negotiators. In parallel, reports suggest that Israeli forces are planning to establish a security corridor at least 3 miles deep inside the Gaza Strip. This so-called Mirage corridor would serve as a buffer, but for many Palestinians, it feels like a new form of occupation, complicating any future withdrawal and undermining trust in the negotiation process. As Netanyahu prepares for what will be his 3rd visit to the White House since Trump's return to power, the world is left holding its breath. Is this the long-awaited breakthrough, or simply another act in a never-ending diplomatic drama? What happens if the talks collapse? Will the violence escalate uncontrollably, perhaps even dragging in powerful regional actors like Iran or Hezbollah? Or, against all odds, is there a genuine path to sustainable peace emerging from these darkest of hours? The answers to these questions will shape not just the fate of Israelis and Palestinians, but the entire geopolitical landscape of the 21st century. The outcome of these negotiations will reverberate far beyond the narrow alleyways of Gaza City or the bustling boulevards of Tel Aviv. The next chapter will be written not only in the corridors of power in Washington and Jerusalem, but also on the streets where ordinary citizens demand change, in the devastated neighborhoods of Gaza where survival is a daily struggle, and in the negotiation rooms of Doha, where diplomats labor over every word of the draft agreement. Will this new round of talks produce a genuine breakthrough, or is the world poised for yet another bloody cycle, another resetting of the clock, with more lives lost and more hope extinguished? To understand what is at stake, experts outline 3 distinct scenarios for the future. In the most optimistic scenario, the current negotiations lead to a genuine ceasefire, perhaps the proposed 60-day truce, which could serve as a bridge toward a lasting resolution. This would not be simple. It would require both sides to make painful compromises. For Israel, this would mean scaling back military operations, permitting the unrestricted flow of humanitarian aid into the Strip, and perhaps agreeing to phased troop withdrawals. For Hamas, it would require accepting robust security guarantees for Israel, and possibly, for the first time, laying down at least part of its arsenal. Success would offer desperately needed respite to millions, allowing for the reconstruction of shattered communities and breathing new life into efforts for regional economic cooperation. It could even create momentum for a broader Middle East peace, building on the fragile foundation of the Abraham Accords. The second, and more likely scenario is one of continued deadlock and sporadic violence. Here, negotiations produce only half measures. Short-lived truces punctuated by renewed fighting. The humanitarian crisis would deepen, more lives would be lost, and the wounds of mistrust would fester, as Akiva Eldar warns. Unless both parties step out of their comfort zones, we are destined for another round of fire. This grim cycle would not only devastate families in Israel and Gaza, but also strengthen hardliners on both sides, making compromise even more elusive. In this world, international mediators would remain stuck, cycling through familiar proposals and predictable disappointments. A third, and far more dangerous scenario, is escalation beyond Gaza's borders. The recent 12-day air war with Iran is a stark reminder of how quickly regional dynamics can change. Iranian-backed groups like Hezbollah, entrenched in southern Lebanon, have already exchanged cross-border fire with Israeli forces. Inflammatory rhetoric from Tehran and other regional capitals has stoked fears of a broader conflict that could engulf the Middle East. If outside actors are drawn into the fray, consequences would ripple far beyond the region. Global oil prices could spike, as shipping lanes through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal become unsafe. Supply chains for critical goods, including food, medicine, and energy, could be disrupted, driving up costs for consumers from London and Lagos to Los Angeles and Tokyo. The impact on international financial markets would be immediate and severe, with investors fleeing risk and governments scrambling to shore up alliances. What does all this mean for you, the viewer, perhaps thousands of miles from the nearest border crossing in Gaza? The answer is simple. In a world that is more interconnected than ever before, conflicts like this one do not stay contained. The Israeli-Gaza crisis directly affects the global economy, shaping the price you pay at the pump, the availability of goods at your local supermarket, and the stability of your investments. For example, when shipping lanes in the Red Sea are threatened by conflict, the cost of transporting goods from Asia to Europe and the Americas can increase dramatically. This was evident in the fallout from previous regional flare-ups, when insurance premiums for cargo ships skyrocketed, and major companies were forced to reroute vessels, adding millions to their operating costs. In turn, these disruptions filtered down to everyday consumers, driving up prices for everything from electronics to clothing. Moreover, the conflict has profound implications for global security and humanitarian efforts. The instability in Gaza has strained the resources of aid organizations, many of which are already stretched thin by emergencies elsewhere. Recent attacks on aid convoys have raised the specter of a complete breakdown in humanitarian delivery, a disaster that would be felt by the most vulnerable. The United States and its allies face difficult choices: how to provide assistance without fueling further violence, how to balance support for Israel's security with the imperative of protecting civilian lives, and how to maintain credibility in a region where trust is in short supply. Beyond economics and geopolitics, there is a moral dimension. The world is watching as ordinary people, families, children, the elderly, pay the ultimate price for decisions made in faraway capitals. Understanding the roots and realities of this conflict is not just a matter for scholars or diplomats. It is a responsibility for all of us. We must learn to look beyond the headlines, to question political spin, and to demand real accountability from leaders. Whether you are an investor making decisions about your portfolio, a student studying international relations, or simply someone who cares about the future of humanity, awareness of these dynamics empowers you to make informed choices aligned with your values. Here is a crucial insight that rarely makes it into the news. While the spotlight often shines on presidents, prime ministers, and generals, the true engines of peace are ordinary people. In Tel Aviv, families of hostages march week after week, refusing to let their loved ones be forgotten. In Gaza, volunteers brave shelling to distribute food and medicine. In Doha, negotiators work around the clock, often at great personal risk, to find common ground. Real progress, as history shows, often begins not with grand diplomatic gestures, but with the persistence and courage of everyday citizens who refuse to be silenced by fear or fatigue. Throughout history, there have been moments when seemingly intractable conflicts have given way to unexpected breakthroughs. Think of the end of apartheid in South Africa, the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland, or the normalization of relations between the United States and Vietnam. Each of these examples was marked by years, sometimes decades, of setbacks, false starts, and shattered hopes. Yet, in each case, a combination of international pressure, local activism, and courageous leadership eventually broke the cycle. Could the Israeli-Gaza conflict follow a similar path? The obstacles are immense, but history teaches us that change is possible, even in the darkest of times. So, will this latest round of negotiations break the cycle of violence, or merely reset the stage for another tragic act? The answer, at least for now, remains uncertain. Political obstacles and mutual suspicion run deep. The ghosts of failed peace efforts, Oslo, Camp David, Annapolis, still haunt the region. History warns us not to expect miracles overnight. Yet, there are signs of movement. International pressure is mounting, public opinion within Israel is more divided and vocal than ever, and even the most hardline leaders are beginning to acknowledge that endless war is not a viable long-term strategy. As one Israeli protester recently said, "We have no choice but to hope and to fight for peace, even when it seems impossible." What can you, as a global citizen, do? First, stay informed. Seek out reputable sources and question simplistic narratives. Second, stay engaged. Support organizations working for peace and humanitarian relief. Third, do not underestimate the power of awareness and advocacy. When the world pays attention, leaders feel the pressure to act. As this critical moment unfolds, remember, the fate of millions may hinge on decisions made in the coming days and weeks. Your attention, your voice, and your choices matter. If you found this analysis insightful, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Together, we can keep the spotlight on the issues that truly matter. And maybe, just maybe, help change the story for the better. Until next time, stay thoughtful, stay compassionate.